All right, it's fifth hour, and we are joined now by Dick Stockton, a legendary figure. What a career he has had over the many years on network television and calling all the big sporting events, NFL, NBA, he's done baseball, you name it. And he joins us now for a special conversation here and a video chat. This is not only available in the audio format, but also in the video format. Dick, welcome. I'm looking at you. You look good here. And how you holding up? How you been handling life here over the pandemic?
I'm doing great, Ben, and I appreciate your asking. I'm doing the smart things. I haven't been, I'm not hunkering down. I'm living life, but I'm doing the smart things. And you know what they are. I don't have to go through the whole list here. We all hear it every day, but I'm doing fine, and we're just all trying to get through this, right?
Yeah, what have you been doing? Is there anything special to pass the time? We got a lot of time these days. Is there anything that you've found?
I have
exercising?
a lot of interests, and and so watching games isn't the only thing in the world for me. I play tennis and I play golf. Following the rules. I work out in my pool. Uh, I play the piano. I play the piano, sing once in a while, but before very few people, as little as possible. And I like to read a lot. When you take everything into consideration, it's life, and I just go through it. I enjoy what I do, and I hope to get back to it. And we hope that we have an NFL season. But it's what I do. It's not who I am, and so life has been, what it is for everyone, but adjusting where it needs to be adjusted.
Yeah, and with that, Dick, I mean, are you planning on calling the games this year? I know there's some guys have said they're not going to do it. Do you know what the plan is for the NFL? Are you going to be in a studio somewhere if you do the games? Or are you actually going to be on site?
Ben, to be honest, we have no definitive word from Fox Sports. I'm under contract to do games, and and I plan to do the games. But we have not heard anything about how it's going to be done. And the great thing about Fox Sports, and it's been this way this is my 27th year with them, is that they call you when they want you to know something. And there are no rumors, there are no innuendos, none of those things happen. And when they tell you, that's what it is. And so when they make a decision, they have to decide how they want to, broadcast these games, and hopefully we'll have them. They'll let me know.
Yeah, and with that, just in general, I mean, you've been around the industry forever, and you've seen so much here. Like, what does your gut instinct tell you on how this is going to work out? I know there's a lot of doomsday people out there that this isn't going to work. What do you think? Can sports pull this comeback off?
It's a great question, Ben, because everyone has speculated. The amazing thing is, when this thing started, they say, what's going to happen to sports? And we've seen some movement in a lot of areas, baseball teams starting to practice and then stop practicing. The NBA gathering in the bubble in Orlando, the NHL planning. We don't know about college football. The NFL is going according to what their plan is. I know that, the preseason schedule to this point has been knocked down from 4 to 2. So I don't have a gut feeling, to be honest. I don't know. I can't predict. I don't think anyone can, as to what it's really going to look like. There are so many reports coming out. I read, one today about the Ravens saying they're going to allow 14,000 people in their stadium. The Chiefs will allow a number of people. I don't know. I really don't know. And so I'm fine with that. We all want to know. And when the word comes down, that'll be the word. And until it does, we just wait and see.
Dick, have you ever been in a position in your long career that rivals something like this? I mean, obviously the climate is drastically different, but just the lack of opportunity to actually be at a venue to call a game and maybe have to do things from a remote studio. Has that ever happened to you, whether it's for baseball, football, basketball at all?
Never. I've never had to call a game from a studio. If I had to, I would be prepared to do so. Obviously, there are going to be different things. I mean, you're not going to have all the people on site if you do that. and we could be on site if they separate your partner, and the people up in the booth. I don't know. I mean, I don't know any of the answers to whether they're going to pipe in crowd noise or whether they're going to have virtual fans in the stands. I have no idea what they plan to do. I think they're having big discussions, but I have never been under that circumstance before. I've always been at the games that I have broadcast, and I've never done it off of a monitor. But if I had to in a studio, that's what I do. Like all the other my old colleagues would have to do the same thing.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you just to piggyback off of that, like during your long career and how you've performed, are there points in a broadcast where you actually use the crowd's emotion and how they've kind of gotten up or even down and use that as an extra tool for you and how you actually sound while you're on air? You feed into that emotion?
That's what I do. I mean, that is what I'm, what I feel. And a lot of broadcasters have been that way. Vince Scully, of course, has been that way, the great Dodger broadcaster. Joe Buck is aware of that very much. And I even employed it, when I called Carlton Fisk's home run way back in the 75 World Series between the Red Sox and the Cincinnati Reds, when Fisk hit the home run and I remained silent for nearly a minute while the crowd was going crazy and the cameras were showing the fans and showing Fisk rounding the bases. And I think that's really what an important part of a broadcast is. I personally feel that announcers talk too much and that, they have so much information at hand that they want to give it out. But the fan at home doesn't want to be assaulted all the time. And, sometimes, the term too much information really fits when you're doing a broadcast. So I believe that there's nothing better than the reaction of the crowd and the different pictures that a director would show, at a sporting event after a touchdown or a home run or any of those things. So, that's the important thing. And so that comes into play a little bit, if we don't have fans at the game.
Yeah, and just to follow that up, you've done radio and television. I know you as the TV guy, but you've done a lot of radio. We're radio guys mostly. So you're great at television, but did you compare and contrast? Do you like radio more when you started, or is it you've always enjoyed television?
Well, I grew up, Ben, I grew up on radio. I mean, I grew up on radio. I think baseball is a radio sport. I think it's meant to be a radio sport. The thing that I love about radio, and I've done, like you mentioned, much more television than radio, is the fact that in radio you use your imagination. You're sitting in front of the radio, set, whether it would be a transistor radio when I was growing up or whatever now, and you imagine things, and the announcer describes what is going on, and you're now imagining the runner running, toward the sun part of the field, or toward the open end of the stadium, into the, whatever the situation may be. And if a good broadcaster describes, in football especially, the uniforms that the team is wearing, or in basketball before it starts, so you can imagine them in the colors that they're wearing. And so it's very important to do it. And some of the best broadcasters on radio that I grew up with didn't talk end to end. They didn't fill every second of they let the crowd come in. There was a great baseball announcer that you may have remembered named Ernie Harwell. And he worked for the Detroit Tigers for, 40 years, 50 years, 30 years, whatever it was. And the great sound, and think of all of the Michigan people late at night, outside listening to just the sound of the crowd for the moment when Ernie was doing a game and just saying what needed to be said.
Yeah, it's great. And you went to Syracuse, but now when you went to Syracuse, now it's broadcasting you. Is it because of you, Dick, that guys like yourself there? Because now, if you want to be a broadcaster in sports, you've got to go to Syracuse.
Well, I suggested they change the name to the Stockton School of Broadcasting instead of the Newhouse School of Broadcasting. But he paid for all those buildings and all those great facilities that they have. And so I wasn't the first one. I was one of the early ones. I think Marv Albert and I were, synonymous. He was ahead, but I think I worked at the campus station before he did, WAER, and all of them have come in since, and some of the great ones that we know have come from Syracuse University, and their facilities actually are as good as any network's facilities. That's how tremendous it's become.
Dick, is there anything professional that you haven't done but you'd like to do?
Well, that's a good question. I have no regrets. I mean, I've called a World Series. I've called 6 Super Bowls on the world feed of the NFL that went overseas. I've done 9 NBA finals. I've done NCAA tournament games. I've hosted a championship game. I've done a couple of Olympics. I've also done a couple of hockey games. And the one thing that I wish, and it's not a regret, is that I had done more hockey, because I really enjoyed hockey growing up in the suburb of New York City, a Ranger fan, and listening to a lot of the games, from out of town on the radio. And if I had an opportunity, I did 2 hockey games for Fox, working with Mike Eruzione when Fox had the contract for NHL. And I would have enjoyed doing more hockey. That's the only thing, but I wouldn't call it a regret.
What about for the Olympics? What events did you call for the Olympics?
Well, I was blessed to call one of the great Olympic events of all time. In the 1994 Winter Olympics, I called Dan Jansen's gold medal and world record speed skating event, and a great story, because, as you know, Jansen had competed and come up short in previous Olympics for various reasons, and he did not win the 500. He slipped, and that was one of the problems he had, falling. But his last event and the last chance to win a gold medal was the 1,000 meter in Hamar in Norway. And Eric Heiden, the great Eric Heiden, who won 5 gold medals in the 1980 Olympics in speed skating, was my partner. And he not only won the gold medal, he set the world record. So he finished on a high note. And so that was great. And in 1992 in Val d'Isere, I called the men's alpine skiing events there. So those are the 2 Winter Olympics I broadcast, and it was a great thrill to do that.
So I guess the question is obvious here, Dick. You've called every type of sport imaginable. Which one is the hardest? Which one, from a play-by-play standpoint, what is the one that is the most difficult to call, whether it be on television or radio?
Well, that's another good question. Now, I never called horse racing. I think that would be a difficult one to call, and I never got into that. But I think, honestly, and people think the sports that you have to fill are the hardest. And I don't look at it that way. I mean, I've called a lot of baseball games, and in baseball, you just don't fill. You let the crowd and the ambience take over. And when there's a big pitch and a big moment, you call that. And sometimes you just say, they see it strike 3 and the pitcher walks off the mound, and you really don't have to say anything. But I think, to me, the hardest is football. And the reason why, man, is because you have a segment of moment of time to call a play. And when you call that play, it has to be correct. It has to be accurate. It has to be the right call. It has to have the right emotion under the moment of the game. And then you have to get out and let your partner come in. And then you may play off your partner at the end. So I think that you have to make a short period count when you call a football game. And that's why I think that's the one that may be the most challenging.
Yeah, and Dick, I mean, what was it like in the early days? I know what it's like now in the business, but when you were breaking in the 60s and the early 70s, and you were making your mark, how difficult was it? What was the process like compared to what it is now?
Well, it's all about experience and all about reps. And I wrote the other day in my column that I do, thestockton.com, which I do one every week, and I talk about a lot of factors of my career. Stockton says, and it's a column I also write for a newspaper called the Thousand Island Sun. And I was talking about preseason football. And the first football game I ever called was a preseason game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the St. Louis Cardinals. And this was in 1968. It was before the Steelers became a powerful team. And I'll never forget, I was calling the game, and the game was going so fast for me that I felt like I wanted to put my arms out, stand up, and say, can you just stop and slow down and let me catch up? Because I had to catch up to who ran the ball, who made the tackle, how many yards did he gain, what down is it? And this was the hardest thing for me to get because it was going too fast. And now, to me, when I call a football game, it's in slow motion. I see the receivers going downfield. I know who they are. It's all about reps. It's all about experience. And so I think when you're doing things in the early days, Ben, it's all about just getting the experience down, and you get better with age and with time.
Dick, on that note, when you started to where you're at now, we see a lot of your content replayed over and over and over again, especially with the Lakers and Celtics and obviously whatnot with the World Series. But you don't have a chapter, you have books of content. So when people obviously watch this material and now you see it on television, some of the greatest games that you've ever witnessed and called, what does that mean to you? How do you feel when you watch those games just in replay?
Well, I just say what a blessed career I've had, and I just watch it. I mean, we all saw The Last Dance. I think a lot of people did, of the Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls championships, and I guess my calls were featured, sprinkled throughout it, and it was just fun to watch. And I would smile recalling those games. I remember calling Jordan's 63-point game, the most points that he ever scored in a game, and it was at Boston Garden. And so what I do when I hear a lot of that is that I remember being there at the time. And I remember walking into Boston Garden for, that second game of that brief, series between the Bulls and the Celtics. And I remember the circumstances of it. When I see the Lakers and the Celtics, I remember sitting down at courtside, no air conditioning at Boston Garden, sweating through my clothes. And I know that the Lakers didn't have any air conditioning either, which is why they had to get IVs at halftime of their games against the Celtics in those memorable, matches they had in the 80s.
Well, and Dick, to follow that up, I grew up watching every great memory I think of with Bird and Magic. You were calling the game. I remember you at the Boston Garden with Tommy Heinsohn and Pat O'Brien at the half. And,
right.
I reminisce. I mean, you must hear this all the time, but you really, when people see you, it's like you flash back to that wonderful time when you fell in love with sports. And you must hear that quite a bit when you're out and about talking to people. But are you known for that? Do you think the Celtics, Lakers is, or just in general, the NBA in the 80s is what you're known for? You've done so much. Do you think that's what your calling card is?
Well, it's funny. I've done, 27 years with Fox doing NFL, and I've done NFL with CBS before. And you're absolutely right. I'm getting to that point. I've done a lot of division, playoffs with Turner when I did those games for them, along with games with Fox, and I did the Olympics. But I think that, people do, tab me with the 80s because I called every Lakers-Celtic final in the 80s. So when you're doing them year in and year out, and, you start, of course, with the 76ers and the Lakers, and you end up with the Detroit Pistons, the bad boys, winning their back-to-back finals, at the end of the 80s up to 1990. So I think people say, yeah, Lakers, Celtics, and maybe more for that than for anything else. Yeah, I think I agree with you there.
Yeah, and also, you did NBA games, as you said, up until a few years ago, and the guys today, there's always this barroom controversy that guys have. Could LeBron and Kawhi Leonard and these guys play against Bird and Magic and the guys before that? You've called those games. You've seen all these different generations of NBA players. What do you say?
I don't get into that, Ben. And the reason why is that we're talking about different eras. I mean, you look at Jerry West and Oscar Robertson and Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. And then you look at the athletes of today, the speed, the size. I mean, the centers were 6'9" at that time. The guards were 6'1". You're 6'1", the chances are you're not going to, be able to see much action because who are you going to defend? And then when Magic Johnson came along as a 6'9" point guard or power forward or center, as he played the one game that Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was out, you remember that? I think it was in 1980. The size and the speed of these players, especially in football. You look at football highlights from the 50s, and you look at football highlights now. I mean, offensive linemen can run faster than running backs did in those days. So, time has made athletes bigger and faster. So to compare, I think is wrong. And for the same token, I think it's wrong to forget about the era of Oscar Robertson and Jerry West, and Elgin Baylor. And if you were to say, and people say, who's Dick talking about? And then you move into the 60s and you look at Akeem Olajuwon and Elvin Hayes, and people say, who are they? And then you move on to other years, and now it's LeBron. And so I think what you have to do, guys, is to just accept the era that you're in and not compare. I think personally, there's too much comparison all around. I mean, somebody wins, they're the greatest team of all time. He's the greatest player of all time. Is this the greatest moment of all time? Let's enjoy the moment and say it goes with all of the great volumes of great sporting events that we've seen over the years. Look, I'll say, Tom Brady, who has won all those Super Bowls, has to be rated. Who would you say would be better? I couldn't find anyone better because of the number of championships he's won and the great success of the Patriots. But I don't think you can go down the line in many areas in many sports and say, the greatest of all time. Let's just honor the ones that are doing it at the time.
Well, Dick, with that being said, do you think leagues have gotten away from what made them truly good or special? I mean, I can think about with the way Major League Baseball is now, there's so much put into sabermetrics, exit velocity, launch angle. And those are things, when you were calling games and calling the World Series, you wouldn't think about it. You use 7, 8, 9 guys out of the bullpen to record 9 outs. Do you think certain leagues have gotten away from what made them truly special, or do you feel like each league has progressed accordingly?
Totally agree. I totally agree with you. I think sports are so different today in so many aspects, and you pinpointed launch angle. I mean, I remember seeing in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, teams would play in the World Series or play big games, and the game of baseball has changed dramatically. You got to look at the baseball diamond and the geometry of what it is, and the great romance of baseball, position playing, and the strategy of hit and run, stolen bases, sacrifice, moving men into scoring position. A base hit gets the run home. But now it's home run or no count, or it's home run and strikeout. And to me, that's not baseball to me. To be honest, I know it's what it is today. I recognize it for what it is. But to me, it's home run or strikeout. And I think when they went to the, home run derby the day before the All-Star games, and young kids, and look, let's face it, young kids come up and they want that. So I'm not saying they should return to those days, but I personally, having been around for many, many years, appreciated the art of baseball when it wasn't just a home run, when it wasn't just the pitcher throwing 98, 96 miles an hour and a strikeout or a walk or a strikeout or a home run. There's more to baseball than that, in my opinion. I mean, Greg Maddux, you don't find a guy like Greg Maddux, a Hall of Fame pitcher anymore, who never had a great fastball, but could get you out with his ball placement, the way he would move pitches around, the way he would off-speed pitches, the way he would change speeds. To me, that's the art. And in basketball, I have to say that it's now 3-point or no count. And it's now who can hit the long shot. It's not about working the ball in. It's not about power basketball, if that's the case. So I think there are a lot of elements to those games that are different today. I'm not going to say they're no good anymore, and I won't say that because that's the way the games are. I just appreciate the way the games were in the other days, and I know that's a day bygone.
So when you were a kid, did you grow up in that cluster? I have a lot of friends that are New Yorkers too, but it's that cluster. It's usually if you're a Yankees fan, you're a Rangers fan, you're a Knicks fan, and so on and so forth. Or if you're the way around, if you're a Mets fan, you're usually a Jets fan, and you're an Islanders fan. Like, what kind of group were you usually affiliated with growing up as a kid?
Well, I was a New York Giant fan, actually, before they moved to San Francisco in baseball. And I saw Willie Mays make a great catch in the 1954 World Series over his shoulder. And so I saw a lot of baseball games in the 50s. Unfortunately, my team left after only about 6 years of my rooting for them, and they moved to San Francisco. And that's what happened then, and the Dodgers moved as well. But I was a Giant fan, hated the Dodgers, and didn't pay any attention to the Yankees, who would win 5 straight World Series. I was a Knicks fan. I was a Ranger fan. And I didn't live in the city. I lived in a suburb of the city. And now today, it's interesting. It's the fantasy leagues. And an owner of an NFL team told me a few years ago, he says, fans come to our game and they don't even root for our kicker because they have another kicker that's their fantasy player. I find that hard to, fathom, but I know it exists and I recognize it.
Yeah, and what do you think? You called Red Sox games and A's games in your career, in addition to the network stuff that you've done. A 60-game season. People have complained for years that baseball, there's too many games in baseball. Well, this year they're only going to get 60. Do you think that there's a chance we will see a shortening of the Major League Baseball season going forward?
No. You know what this is all about, right? Money. And it's all about opening up the gates. And it's not so much how great it would be to have a 60 or 80 game or 100-game baseball season. Now open up those gates, 81 home games, 81 road games, and that's what you do. And that's why they wouldn't change that. And it's a matter of, they want to increase the NFL season, and they probably will at some point. And that's going to work when they do that, I think. There are a lot of, ways you can look at that. But I think that they're not going to make it short. And I think that what people should do this year, and we hope we do have a season, is that just adopt it and acknowledge it. Don't criticize it. Don't pick it apart. Don't nitpick everything that's going on. I know that, when it comes to records, someone may hit 450 by the end of the season. That doesn't mean they're Ted Williams, who hit 406 in 1941. Just accept the year for what it is. I think the records aren't going to work, but everything else will. And they're going to play baseball, and they're going to have sports. Hopefully they do. And if they do, that'll be wonderful.
That's great. And I can't talk to you, Dick, without bringing up, you were a guest on The Blitz that I used to host on Fox Sports Radio on the weekends. And you had a line. I've actually stolen it from you. It's one of the great lines. You were calling a game between a couple of teams in the NFL that were not particularly good. And I asked you a question, because we had you on before the game, and you were supposed to. Your job is to hype the game up and get people watching. I was like giving all these numbers and statistics about how terrible these teams were, and you had the greatest comeback. It's so good that I stole it and I added it to my repertoire. And you said, Ben, stats tell you what has happened, but not what's going to happen. And that's one of the great lines. I gotta credit you, because that was a wonderful comeback to put me in my place.
Well, I didn't mean to do that. I was just trying to talk about people that go by what the past performance is. And last week he gained 185 yards, and I said this week will probably gain 60, because teams look at film during the week and they say we got to stop this guy who got 185, and they do, and somebody else goes crazy. A wide receiver catches 12 passes. So I don't really rely on a lot of statistics that well. But you brought up another point, a good point, about a game between two teams, that a game doesn't mean anything. Now, maybe nationally, a game between two last-place teams don't mean anything. But I remember growing up, I wanted my team to win. They may have had a losing record. They may have been close to last place. But if they won that game, I felt good. And so what I do every week, and I don't get the top games now. I've been around a long time, and guys deserve their chance to move up, and they do. I'm glad to be doing games, but I don't get top games anymore, and it doesn't bother me, and I don't care, because I know that the fans in those cities want that team to win that day. And if they're 4-8 and they win and go 5-8, they feel good all week, and the food tastes good all week, and they're 5-8, and so they want to win that game. And just think, the players are practicing all week long, and they're going through their paces. Why? Because they want to win the football game. So it has nothing to do with what does it mean nationally. Sure, they're out of the playoff race, but they want to get a victory. They want to get a win. And to me, that's the base of what sports competition is all about.
It's a great way to say it. And I just was looking at your blog here, your column that you write, and you wrote about Muhammad Ali and your relationship with Muhammad Ali. Obviously, it's a tough question because he's not around anymore. But what do you think he would? How do you think he would react to everything that's been going on in the world here in 2020? And he was a big part of in his day, movement with society, and it's been wild what's gone on here in 2020. How do you think he would react to what's been going on?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I know that Muhammad Ali was a man for peace. Okay, I mean, he was a man who talked about peace. He wasn't a violent man. I know that, and I know that he stood up for his values. And I know that whatever he said, I wish Muhammad Ali were here today because he could be a calming force. He could be a calming guy for society because everyone loved Muhammad Ali. He had that smile. He had that magic. There was something about Ali that was tremendous. And so if Muhammad Ali could speak today, I wish he could. That's all I would say.
All right, it's been a pleasure, Dick Stockton. And again, the blog, you've got a column. Everyone's got to check it out. Watch you on the NFL on Fox. It's dstockton.com, correct?
Yes, it is. dstockton.com. And when you that's the website. And Stockton Says is where the columns are. And I talk about stories, inside stories of my career. It's not just then I did this and then I did this. That's boring to people. It's not a rundown of great games that I did. It's stories behind the scenes things, interesting things of people that I've met along the way, and I think people would enjoy them very much. But I've enjoyed talking with you and David, Ben, and it's been great talking to you today.
A lot of fun. Thanks for joining us, Dick, today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.